Good morning, and thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be in Hebrews chapter 11. You may recognize that as the chapter of faith. The author of Hebrews has done a very good job transitioning from one idea or one concept to another as he's gone through the book of Hebrews. Here, going from chapter 10 to chapter 11 is no difference. In chapter 10, he's warning the readers that they need to remain faithful. Do not turn back. Do not go back to the old law. That does not hold the promise of the new law. The new covenant is much better. And so he's warning them, don't turn around, don't go back. And so in the last verse of chapter 10, he says, but we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who believe and are saved. Recently, I read a story about a Navy SEAL and his team who went into a foreign country and they taught the nationalists how to fight against the insurgents who were destroying their home and their country. And they were teaching them how to fight against these and how to win the battle. And in the process, they did very well in learning the principles that were taught. But when they got into battle, they turned and they fled. They ran away. And as a result, some of them were shot and killed, and some were wounded. But eventually they came to know and trust that the ones that were training them knew what they were talking about. They put their faith in them and they believed in them. And because they did, they were able to not only become good fighters, but in some ways even surpassed those training them, because they were fighting for their own country. But it took them putting their faith and their trust in one another and those that were training them. In John chapter 20, the author here is referring to Jesus and how when he raised from the dead, he showed himself to the disciples and they believed in him. But Thomas wasn't there. And so when he heard about this from the disciples, he said, I won't believe that I saw him die. I saw him die, and I won't believe that he is risen unless I see the nail marks in his hand and put my hand in his side where the spear pierced him. I won't believe. So when Jesus later appeared to them, a week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. Thomas said to him, my Lord and my God. Then Jesus told him, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Faith is believing in something even though we can't see it. In the end of chapter 10, he's warning them that if they go back to their old ways, that they will be destroyed, that they have no hope. And he says in the very end of it, but of those who believe and are saved. That's who we are. We're of those who believe and are saved. We're saved because of that belief. That word believe is pisteo. Now, pisteo is also the word that is used for faith. So in the next chapter, in chapter 11 and verse 1, it says, now faith, the same word, pisteo, is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Belief is something of trust, putting our trust, our belief, our faith in something that we cannot see. In the same chapter, Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 16, he says, instead, were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. They had a promise. They had something that they were looking forward to. They believed that God would fulfill that promise. And because they believed, they were blessed. and rewarded for that belief. And that is the story of Hebrews chapter 11. Those who believed, put their trust in God, God blessed them. There are many examples through the Old Testament of those that did not believe, those did not put their trust in God, and how they did not receive the reward, but rather they suffered the loss. They were the ones that were destroyed. But in chapter 11, it is putting the focus on those who did believe, those who did trust in God. So it starts off again in chapter 11, verse 1. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. It says in Genesis chapter 1 that God created everything from nothing. It was created by him, not because of something visible, but something invisible. We believe that. We put our trust and faith in that. We can see the results. Look around you. Look at the beauty of the world. Look at the skies, the stars, the heavens. We can see that God exists. We can see that the things that he has claimed is true. Even scientists, when they discover things that the Bible already told them about, are sometimes surprised. But if you put your trust and faith in God, you will know and you will believe that these things are true. And, and this was the example of those who believed. In verse 4 it says, by faith Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offering. And by faith he still speaks even though he is dead. You remember the story of Cain and Abel, how Cain was the farmer and Abel was the shepherd. Both of them were doing well, were being blessed. But when it came time to offer a sacrifice, I believe God had told them what he required, what he wanted. But Abel was the one that presented a presentable sacrifice to God, and Cain presented one that was not acceptable to God. I believe that was because Abel put his trust and faith in what God had asked him to do. And Cain probably was just saying, well, this is probably just as good. This will do as well because it's of my hands, so this is perfect for me. But he was not trusting in God. He did not put his faith in him, believe in him. And because of that, it is Abel that is called the one who is faithful. In verse 5, it says, by faith Enoch was taken from this life, so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. There's a few different keys here. First of all, Enoch, the only one that was taken up to heaven, short of Elijah, who was taken up in the chariot. But here Enoch was taken up to heaven, did not experience death. Why? Because he was faithful, that he believed, put his faith and trust in God. I like the fact that he closes that section there in verse 6 by saying, and without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Those who earnestly seek him, those who seek him with all of their being, those are the ones that God rewards. Those are the ones that God gives the promise to, those who truly put their faith and trust in him. It's more than just an intellectual belief. It is a heartfelt belief, one that carries with it obedience, carries with it the desire to fulfill God's will, to earnestly seek Him. In verse 7, he goes on, by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. And by his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. The righteousness that comes by faith is represented here by Noah because of the fact that even though he didn't understand this idea of flooding, this concept of the rain coming down and flooding the whole earth, this was foreign, something that they had never seen. It is said that there was a firmament above the earth that held moisture, and that because of that there was a natural dew or a watering of the land from actually that firmament. But when the flood came about, that there was no longer that separation. That firmament from above became rain and flooded the earth. And from that time on, we know, we see, we understand what rain is. But Noah, he didn't have that experience. But yet he believed, he trusted in God, and he did what he was asked to do. He was faithful in doing what God had asked him. And because of it, he received the righteous reward. In verse 8, it says, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place that he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger, in foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were the heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. He was looking forward to heaven. He followed God's desire for him. He put his faith and trust in God, and he did what God asked him to do. He left his family, he left his home, he left everything that was familiar to him, and went to a strange land, lived in tents, not as a native, but as a foreigner. And he became known as the one who believed and trusted in God, put his faith in him. It wasn't easy, I'm sure. There may have even been times when he would look at things and wonder if he had made the right decision. But he believed, and because of that, he put his full faith and trust in God. And God rewarded him for that. And there was an even better reward waiting for him in heaven. But in verse 11, he says, by faith, Abraham, even though he was past the age and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. God promised him that he would bless him with many children, more than he could count, more numerous than the sands of the sea. And sure enough, he was blessed with that very thing. Even though he didn't see it, even though he didn't live long enough to see all of those children born, he did see the promise being fulfilled through his son Isaac. In verse 13 it says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised, they only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, and they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. Even though they did not receive all of the benefits, they saw it from a distance. They knew what the promise was and that God had been faithful, even though they didn't see the fulfillment of it all. The same thing is true about heaven. We're promised that. We know that he is faithful and will provide that. But until the day we walk into heaven with him, stand in his presence, we won't know or understand all that he is promising. In verse 14, it says, people who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of a country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. The same city that has been promised, that they look forward to and believe in, that they have worked towards, is also ours. He makes that same promise to us. If we believe in him, if we choose to follow him, if we do his will, knowing that he is faithful, we will have that promise of eternal life with him. We will enjoy this beautiful city that he has prepared for us. All of these things point to the fact that if we put our faith and trust in him, he is faithful. He will give us the things that he has promised. I believe the reason the writer of Hebrews presented this material is so that we would be able to put our faith and trust in Jesus Christ. Even though bad things may happen, even though we may suffer, even though there might be hard times in our lives, we can put our faith and trust in God. Because the promise of eternal life is not something that we get the benefit from on this earth. It's something that we get to look forward to. It's something that he has promised us that we will see in the end. I hope that as you consider these things, if you consider what God is promising you in your decision to follow him, that you will put your full faith and trust in him, that he is faithful, that he is able to deliver. May you have a wonderful week, and I hope that you will come back next week and hear some more about God's faithfulness and his desire for us to live by faith in him.